so like I said, I've been married forever. I think for me, I'm stuck in a psychosexual phase. Honestly, I think that I didn't graduate from that phase, and I've had very few relationships. I think, other than my wife, I've had one relationship in my life. So at the age of 46, I think there was a part of me that was thinking that I was missing out on something physical. I thought that maybe sex on some level was this magical thing that everybody else was experiencing except for me. And so I went away, and then I wasn't like I didn't get into an affair or anything like this, but I think I was emotionally attached to another human being for a couple minutes, but not them as a person. I think I was more attached to the idea of love as a concept, and I realized after the fact that all human beings are equally fundamentally disgusting. I mean, it's like, when I was a kid, I remember like putting women on a pedestal in my mind. I used to think, oh, clearly women are not just the other side of the human equation. Clearly they're goddesses that are completely different than me. And then as I got older, I was like, nope. It is just other human beings, just like assigned at birth, different reproductive tackle that comes with it, a whole litany of problems when it comes to trying to fit into the gender roles that everybody seems to have imposed on us. Like sitting like this apparently is not masculine, so I will do it like this. Because when your legs are spread open like this, it implies like, yeah, whatever, man, come at me, I got this, right? When you're like this, it's like, you know, I really like herbal tea. Speaking of which, I really do like herbal tea. So I think there's a whole lot of the work that I've done in terms of the albums that is based on my naivety. I think not only in terms of relationships and sex and all these sorts of like human things, but also just life in general. My mother used to say to me that whether or not she believes it, she's always sort of subscribed to the idea that there's old souls and there's new souls. And she's always been like, oh, it's your first time around the block. You've never been here before. Like my sister, she's just like, oh, I'm in love, yeah, it's fucking whatever, right? And I'm just like, oh my God, I'm in love! I need to write a musical about it. I need to write a whole thing about it. We had a child, a human being came tumbling out of a vagina. It changed the entire perspective of what sex means. Oh my God, that's crazy. Maybe I'm gay. No, I'm not gay. Maybe what it is ultimately is it's just the whole thing that I've been fed about sex is so heavily rooted into like advertising and pornography that when you see it for what it is, which is like painful human reproduction, I was just like, what in the fuck? So that's usually what Deadhead was about. So. I think my lizard brain really gets the best of me for the most part because I like to intellectualize my emotions. I like to think, oh, I feel X, therefore this is the reason. I can trace it back. It's either back to your childhood or there's a certain like inhibitor that is now being blocked as a result of alcohol or something, and that's why I'm feeling that. But then when the lizard brain kicks in, you're like, oh, it's an unconditional fundamental attachment to another child. Wow, that's fucking crazy. Or it's like, I don't need anything when it comes to physical because I'm living in my head, boobies! And then your brain just sort of goes down that avenue, and then I feel embarrassed about it. It's the same reason I can't pee in public, right? It's because I'm just like horrified by the fact that I'm peeing, right? Or when people look at me while I'm eating, it's the same thing. So, you know, it's just all just disgusting, yet food, So it's this weird dichotomy between, oh, I want to eat, oh, it's so fucking good, and then I'm eating it, I'm like, oh, it's gross. This is a horrible process. So, yes, and that was probably all of accelerated evolution. All right. Do you play computer games? If so, which one is your favorite? Have they influenced your music? Fucking hate video games. Hate them. Hate them. I know, and I try. Every time. And it's because they're complicated and they're super, like, I'm hypersensitive to stimulus. Like when whatever comes in comes out. Like earlier when all of a sudden everybody was clapping and I wrote this stupid thing. I was like, I got a huge asshole. Again, it's like, which would be a good name. First name Hugh, last name Jazzhole. But I remember thinking at the time, I'm like, dude, you're doing it again. It's because you're uncomfortable with the thought of not being able to do this, that now you're going into this comedy scheme. So computer games are very similar for me because they're super overwhelming when I watch it. Remember my buddy, he's got like a 75-inch TV, and he's like, check this out. He's like killing things, and it's got some scope that you have to press 2 buttons at the same time. And if you do it right, you get like some virtual prize that doesn't mean shit, and it was really hard to get. And then he's like, check it out, Red Dead Redemption. Look, the horse's testicles shrink. And I'm like, Okay, that's interesting. Right. And my son, he plays Fortnite and like, you know, all that stuff, right? No, I know. Yeah, we should just fucking tell him what for. Listen, kid, don't fucking do this shit. That is a lame game. I don't know. All computer games seem to like rub me the wrong way, except for Burnout. Because, yes, and I'll tell you why. Because you hold one button, it goes 300 miles an hour, things blow up, and it tells you you're great. Like the whole thing. It's like, you're awesome. Your mommy loves you. You look good in that shirt. I like that one, right? But the ones that you killed prostitutes doesn't do a whole lot for me. Seems like there's like a lot of the developers are just like, yeah, we'll make the testicles shrink. You kill prostitutes. I'm like, thank you. All right, so what does the future hold? That is a very vague question. Yeah, I spent 3 weeks in India and then I went to Jerusalem today, so my outlook is not particularly woke right now. So, yeah, I know. Who are you planning to collaborate with in the near future? Nobody. I cannot wait to not collaborate with somebody. And it's because the process of writing music for me is not like a lot of people, I think. It's a byproduct of me trying to not be a fucking idiot in life. And I've said this before in these, whatever this is, thing that we're doing, but someone best described my musical process to me, and I don't think he was being complimentary, but it seems to really work. He says, at the end of the tunnel there is death, or whatever. It's like the light at the end of life is death, and as a moth you are drawn towards that light because you're too stupid, or whatever. But to get there you have to plow through a field of cow shit, and then as you plow through it, the shit flips to the side and solidifies into music. And when I use that as an explanation for potential collaborators, they're like, yeah, no. So a lot of times people are like, oh, what was the reason for doing this, or which one of these songs is your favorite, or could you remember how to play a song while I'm up here? And I'm like, I don't remember any of it, really. And the function of it only exists for it to stop irritating me, and then once it stops irritating me, you release it, and if it's accurate enough, then it represents in some way moments of emotional significance that resonate with something true that is beyond the artist, and that other people can hopefully find something to relate to within it. And that, again, is such a vision-based way of writing that actually collaborating with people today drives me crazy. And there's this kind of fetishism that I find where, specifically currently, where everyone's like, well, you should put together a super group. And I'm like, well, number one, prog metal does not qualify for super anything. It is the shallow end of the musical gene pool. And I think that when you get a bunch of people, it's like, this guy sold 5,000 records, and this guy sold 3,200 records. They're going to get together and rule the world. And it's just like, it doesn't work like that. It's just everybody standing there in the photo. You know, I just don't want to do that. I don't want to play with anybody.
Hey, Devin.
Yes, sir.
The guy with the couch, that was me. I interviewed you 4 years ago.
Really?
Yeah.
That was you?
That was me.
I've used that quote so many times, man. I've used that quote so many times, and I think, was it complimentary or not?
It was.
It was. Wait, let me think about that. I'd like to give you a compliment.
It's not complimentary.
Yeah, that was you. That was a good interview too, man. I appreciate that, because that actually stuck with me, that quote, and I've used it so many times, and it gets me out of answering questions like that last one, so thank you so much. Okay, so what does the future hold? Oh God, I feel so weird. No, I actually don't. I find that I say I feel weird, but I actually don't. I actually feel pretty good today. I actually feel really good. I like it. All right, so what does the future hold? I guess that is not just a vague question asking what the future does hold, because wrong guy qualified to give any sort of thing with the stuff and the guy and the thing. How do you get 30 Canadians out of a swimming pool? Time to get out, boys. Yeah, that's it. All right, so you seem to use the concept of meditation in your latest work and artwork. Do you do spiritual practice meditation in your life? How is this affecting your writing? Does psychedelics influence some of your work? Yes to all. So, yeah, I mean, the spiritual side of things is super important to me. That's why it's like religion is so confusing to me, because it seems to be rooted in, everybody sort of has some sort of awareness that there are things that exist beyond us, yet the definitions of such lead people to kill each other ruthlessly, and I don't understand it, because it seems to be much different than any moments of spiritual significance that I've participated in, which seem to be rooted in a sense of unity, where our place in the universe and amongst each other is that we're all kind of joined and participating in this chaotic mosaic in a group sort of fashion. And so the spiritual stuff for me, yeah, of course, I meditate every day, every night, but not for the sake of trying to become enlightened. I think that is, if you believe in lifetimes, it's like many away from me. I still got to get through the poo-poo-poopy phase, right? But I think that the reason why I find it something that is very important for me to practice is it's very much akin to going to the gym and exercising for the sake of keeping your muscles or your bones strong. My tendency to overthink is such that I can turn a molehill into a mountain about anything. Even the clapping thing earlier, I spun and I was like, damn, just haul this back, what are you doing? And then that is something that is getting better, but it also requires practice for me. And so the idea of sort of sitting and not forcing yourself, but being in participation with something that in its foundation is meant to focus on one thing to the exclusion of all else is like training to keep myself away from that over-analysis or thinking about thinking. And I started doing it intensively, I guess, for the Empath project. And I think that what it forced me to do also as a result of trying to keep my focus on my breath is, in the beginning I would be very critical of myself every time I lost my breath. I would think that, oh, you're an idiot, you shouldn't do this. It's like, you failed. And I think that mechanism has been at play through my creative work for most of my adult life, where if I was a boss, I would be thrown in jail for how I treat my employees, right? It's like, I remember going to a psychiatrist years ago and she asked me, well, what is your mantra? And I was like, well, what's that? She goes, well, it's something you repeat to yourself daily. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm a fucking idiot. She's like, that can't be your mantra. And I was like, well, you asked. So what I started doing about a year and a half ago is looking at myself in the mirror in the morning and telling myself that I loved myself as almost like an exercise. And Empath was the side effect of that. It was the shit that solidified into a record. That in order for me to enforce boundaries in my personal life that up to this point has taken a lot of energy from me because I didn't have the self-confidence to say no. Trying to foster a sense of self-love or self-acceptance by doing, saying I love myself in the mirror, which is really hard if you've not tried it. It's very difficult, right? Also, within the meditation practice, as opposed to every time I lose my focus, being critical of myself and saying you're not doing it properly, you're not becoming enlightened, you're not this and that and the other thing. It's about gently getting myself back to the breath, and that process of self-care in the midst of a practice that focuses me on one thing has really helped, because Empath as a result ended up being a linear theme, which ultimately is on one level about life and how life is complicated and dynamic. But on another one, like, how do you get through the chaos of it all and don't let it tear you out? How do you, the friends of mine that have committed suicide or got severe depression, and I mean, I'm sure like a lot of us, we go through moments of depression. Empath was about how do you go through the chaos, how do you recognize it without identifying with it as being your primary psychological function, yet have it as a part of your creative process and get through it. And I think that the point of it is almost like, well, if other people, if it is true that we are all connected, then if other people are doing it, self-help is the best kind of method that I think any of us can employ on an artistic level to try and make things better. Because other than that, what are you going to do, protest? I mean, it's like, I don't know, it's like I see a lot of times in Vancouver people protesting about things, or people just yelling and screaming and arguing about each other. But I think if you start with your own sense of self-worth, meditation being the way that I have found it, and physical exercise is like the ways that I found that, then love and be loved as a concept is not only like a hippie sentiment, but also something very difficult. Because in order to accept love, you also have to accept death in its primary form. And the idea of giving yourself and surrendering to something, knowing that it's going to ultimately die, is a leap of faith that I think is very important. And so that concept, I think, has been there since the beginning. When I was younger, I tried psychedelics a bunch of times, and it was great, right? But it's like, you get to a certain point, and it's like, well, there's nothing else here for me. It's like everything here is just work now. It's making going to the bank and playing with money like super weird. I'm like, well, it's a metaphor. So, I stopped that years ago, and meditation has been something that I've been hoping can align myself with the experience in a way that's more tangible. And it's been there since the beginning. I don't know why. I think it's nature. Ultimately, I was like looking at the mountains or looking at the trees or seeing anything in the sky or the universe, anything that sort of makes me feel small. I love the concept of infinity. I love that. I love the idea that it's just endless. Because at that point, you're perpetually in the middle. And there's something metaphorically about that plays into all the music, I think. All right, that's all right, so, hi Devin, hello. Hi, Roy. I always wanted to know, how do you come up with your ideas? I would have never thought of a coffee-loving alien as being a good idea for an album. Well, I mean, it's debatable as to whether or not it was, to be fair. So here's how the process works. As the last question alluded to, I feel that in life, as artists, we have moments of emotional significance that imprint themselves on our DNA in some way. And by that I mean we're privy to something that is clearly either intangible to us intellectually, whether or not it's important to or not, or it's just beyond us. Like birth is a good example, death is a good example, looking at the universe is a good example. I feel when those sorts of experiences imprint themselves on me, they become a shape and a form and a color. I function musically in a process that I think is called synesthesia, where I perceive notes and colors as a simultaneous thing, shapes as well. C is blue, A is red, B is orange, G is green, D is blue, different blue, F is green, F and G are triangles, C is a circle, you know what I mean, a major scale is a square. And so as a result of that, these moments of emotional significance become a very specific thing for me. And then the process of trying to articulate that through music is more about recognizing what it is not, and then fumbling around through the emotional implications of how do you dig into this, and then removing everything from it. It's like if you got a chunk of rock and you're trying to make a sculpture, I would imagine that you just remove everything that isn't, it's like you remove everything that isn't the sculpture. And then ultimately at the end of it, a deadline helps, because as the process comes more into focus, it becomes clear to me that there's certain clues that reflect in my personal life, and it just seems like your subconscious drives it. For example, with Empath, while I was writing, I had no idea why the music was dynamically moving in so many directions, but as I started getting further into it, I realized that subconsciously the idea of empathy, the idea of participating in other people's emotions that maybe perceive their environment in a different way than you, is you have to participate in emotions that you either fear or are conflicted by. And so those pieces of music that previously had no trajectory become important to that album. And then by the end, the colors, the font, all these things are not a vision that was there from the beginning. You're chasing a feeling, and then the ultimate goal is at the end of it, when people listen to it, the hope is that they can recognize the truth that was in that moment of emotional significance through your work, through your bias, through everything that you are that makes you an individual, in a way that they can say, okay, I get that, I understand it. So that's how the work is. And then the coffee thing, as I explained earlier, well, maybe not, holy shit, I talk a lot. With Strapping on Lad, I was under the assumption that that particular part of my musical psychology was an aberration. I thought that anger and aggression was something that I should weed out of my system. And I realized after Strapping, after my son had been born, and after the whole Devin Townsend project came to an end, that as a child, my family was, as loving as we were we were not encouraged to have overt displays of emotion, and therefore anger was the one that was forbidden in a lot of ways. And so we didn't learn how to articulate anger. It came out as sarcasm, it came out as a lot of things. And then when I got older and I realized that anytime I saw an overt display of anger, I was frightened by it. So strapping ultimately became a defense mechanism in a way for me to keep it at bay. I thought if I can be louder and heavier and angrier than everybody, then it won't affect me. Like confrontation is difficult, anger is difficult. However, I realized through that project that by doing it, I just drew it to myself. But when my son was born, I was like, okay, I don't want anything to do with that anymore. And Ziltoid became a manifestation of that energy in a way that I could objectify. And so I put the dread that I had, I glued it to this rubber oven mitt, and it was yellow. And coffee didn't matter. It was like the idea with the coffee is that he's this crazy thing, this interdimensional being that ultimately just can't get a fucking good cup of coffee, right? Like he's just like, God, why can't I just have coffee? Jesus Christ, right? So his just by manifesting him, it became a way for me to like observe him in almost a comedic sense, and then say, okay, well, your anger and all these parts of your creative identity that you were concerned about is actually a part of you that just hasn't been resolved. And by doing that, it ended up in Empath, where now, going back to Hear Me or Singularity or any of the album, or any of the songs on the album, I realize now that these are human parts, and not only they're parts of me that I haven't given any love to. And by allowing them to have a voice on Empath, yet not allowing any of those specific emotions to identify you, it's almost like let them bubble to the surface, and at the end, you're just it results in a binary experience that you're beyond in a way. Was very cathartic and very easy for me to recognize now that yes, this is a part of me, this is a healthy part, and anger isn't something to fear as much as just to learn where its place is in your emotional development. Wow. Yes, Paul. It's interval time. Does that mean that everybody gets to go get booze and take a pee? All right. So, hi. I do talk a lot, and it has been really, really nice to be in your country, in your city again. So I'm going to leave, and I'm going to come back in 20 minutes, and I've got a bunch more songs, and we've got a bunch more questions, and if that's okay, we will continue to do this. Thank you so much for that. So 20 minutes, have a drink, use the washroom, and I shall be back. Thank you so much.